For 11 years, Charlotte Ashford ate every family dinner at the children's table. Even after the children grew taller than she was, even after her hair began to show the first quiet signs of silver at her temples, though she was only 27, her aunt called it tradition, her uncle called it her place. But on one cold October evening, the Duke of Ravenmere walked into that dining room, looked past 12 glittering guests, straight at one empty chair, and asked a question no one in that house had dared to ask in 11 years. Who is missing? Charlotte had learned, long ago, not to expect anything from family dinners. She had come to Harrow Hall as a girl of 9, an orphan with a small trunk and eyes swollen from crying. Her father, Captain Edward Ashford, had died far away in the war. Her mother had gone 2 years before that, and so Charlotte was handed over to her uncle, Lord Harrow, the husband of her late mother's sister, a man with a soft voice and cold eyes, who greeted her at the door with these words: "You will find, child, that we all have our place in this house. Yours is to be quiet and grateful." That first night, they sat her at the children's table. It made sense then. She was 9. Her cousin Arabella was 7, and there were the neighbors' little ones, and a kind nanny named Mrs. Higgins who cut her meat for her and told her stories. Charlotte did not mind. She was a child. But then she turned 12, then 15, then 18, the age when other young ladies were presented to society, given silk gowns and dance lessons and hopeful whispers about suitors. Charlotte was given nothing. And still, at every family dinner, every holiday, every gathering, her aunt would touch her shoulder with 2 fingers, never more than 2, as if Charlotte were something not quite clean, and say the same words. "The small dining room for you, dear. You know how crowded the table gets." The table was never crowded. There was always an empty chair. Charlotte had counted once when she was 20, 14 chairs, 11 people. She had stood in the doorway doing the arithmetic with a burning face, and her uncle had watched her count, and he had smiled. That smile said, "Yes, there is room, and still you will eat with the children." The servants pitied her. She knew this because pity has a particular sound, the sound of a cook putting the best slice of pie on her plate without a word, the sound of a footman clearing his throat and looking away when the aunt's voice rang down the hallway. "Charlotte, why are you standing where guests can see you?" 27 years old, a woman grown, eating supper beside a 7-year-old boy who liked to hide peas in his napkin. If you had asked her aunt, Lady Harrow, why, she would have laughed her light, silvery laugh and said, "Oh, but Charlotte prefers it. She's so wonderfully shy, poor thing. Society frightens her." That was the story they told. And when a lie is told for 11 years in a beautiful house by beautiful people, it stops sounding like a lie. It starts sounding like the truth. Charlotte herself had almost begun to believe it. Almost. But that October evening was different, and everyone in the house felt it from the moment the invitations went out. Because that evening, the Duke of Ravenmere was coming to dinner. The servants spoke of nothing else for a week. The Duke of Ravenmere, one of the richest men in England, master of lands that took 3 days to cross, a war hero with a scar above his brow and, more importantly, no wife. 35 years old, unmarried and famously cold. It was said he had refused half the eligible daughters of London. It was said he never smiled. It was said that 3 years ago, a countess had fainted at a ball simply because he looked at her too long. Lady Harrow did not care about any of that. She cared about one thing only. The Duke was unmarried and her daughter Arabella was 25, beautiful, and though no one said this aloud, still without a husband. "Everything must be perfect," Lady Harrow announced. "The silver, the pheasant, Arabella's blue gown, the one that matches her eyes." Then her gaze slid across the room to the corner where Charlotte sat mending a pillowcase, and her voice flattened. "And Charlotte will take her dinner with the children in the small dining room, with the door closed. Charlotte did not even look up from her needle. Yes, Aunt. 11 years teaches you when to fight. This was not the evening for it, or so she thought. The Duke arrived at exactly 7 o'clock. Charlotte saw him only for a moment, one single moment, through the gap in the upstairs banister, where she had paused with little Thomas on her hip, because the boy wanted to see the giant everyone kept whispering about. The Duke of Ravenmere was tall, dark-haired, dressed in black. He handed his coat to the footman and lifted his eyes, and for half a heartbeat, Charlotte was certain he looked directly at her, up through the shadows of the staircase. She stepped back so fast she nearly stumbled. "Come, Thomas," she whispered, her heart beating strangely. "Our supper is getting cold." In the grand dining room everything gleamed. Candlelight on silver, Arabella in blue, seated by careful accident directly across from the Duke. Lord Harrow at the head of the table telling his best hunting story. 12 guests, laughing at all the right moments. And the Duke of Ravenmere, silent, looking slowly around the table as if he were counting. Then he spoke, and because he spoke so rarely, the whole table fell quiet at once. "Forgive me," said the Duke. His voice was low and calm, "but I believe someone is missing." Lord Harrow's fork paused in the air. "Missing, Your Grace." "There," the Duke nodded toward the far end of the table. "An empty chair, a place that was set and then cleared away. You can still see the mark of the cloth on the wood." A small, terrible silence. Lady Harrow laughed her silvery laugh, though it came out thinner than usual. "Oh, Your Grace has sharp eyes. No, no one is missing. We are all here. All the family." "All the family," the Duke repeated slowly, as if tasting the words. And it was in that exact moment, in that pause, in that silence, that the sound came through the wall. A woman's laughter. Warm, bright, real laughter from somewhere beyond the dining room, the kind of laugh that does not belong to a servant afraid of being heard, but to someone making a child giggle so hard he forgot his manners. Then a small boy's voice, delighted. "Again! Do it again!" Every member of the Harrow family went pale at the same time, as if the room itself had lost its blood. The Duke of Ravenmere set down his glass. "Curious," he said quietly, "for a house where no one is missing, someone behind that wall sounds very much alive." "Your Grace," Lord Harrow began. But the Duke was already rising from his chair. He rose the way a storm rises, without hurry, without permission, and every eye in the room followed him as he crossed the long dining room, past the frozen footman, straight toward the small door at the far end. The door to the children's dining room. Lady Harrow stood up so quickly her chair scraped the floor. "Your Grace, please, there is nothing in there but the children and there." The Duke of Ravenmere put his hand on the door. "And opened it." The door opened, and the Duke of Ravenmere stood very still. The small dining room was warm and plain. A modest fire, a table with a worn cloth, 3 children in their nightclothes, and in the middle of them, on a low chair, sat a woman in a gray dress, holding a spoon in the air like a magic wand mid-story, her face bright with laughter. "Charlotte." The candlelight touched her face, and the Duke did not move. He did not speak. He stood in the doorway like a man who had seen a ghost, and in a way he had, though Charlotte could not have known that. She could not have known why the color drained from his face, or why his hand tightened on the door frame, or why his lips parted slightly, as if a name had risen to them and stopped there. For a long moment, the great Duke of Ravenmere, the man who had made a countess faint with a single glance, simply stared at a woman in a mended gray dress sitting at a children's table. Charlotte lowered the spoon. "Your Grace," she said softly, and rose and curtsied. 11 years of invisibility had taught her perfect manners. They were the one thing no one had been able to take from her. "Forgive us. Were the children too loud? The Duke opened his mouth, closed it. When he finally spoke, his voice was not quite steady. No, he said, the children were not too loud, the dining room was too quiet. Behind him, the hallway filled with rustling silk and hurried footsteps. Lady Harrow appeared at his shoulder, her smile stretched so tight it looked painful. Your Grace, you see, just the children and their little supper. Nothing of interest. Charlotte, why is the door not closed? Come, Your Grace, the pheasant is getting cold. Who is she? The question was quiet. It was also somehow as heavy as a dropped stone. Lady Harrow's smile flickered. She. This is Charlotte, Your Grace, a distant relation, under my husband's protection. She is very shy, poor thing. She prefers to eat with the children. She always has. It is quite her own choice. Is it? The Duke turned his head slowly and looked at Charlotte. Really looked at her, and Charlotte felt that look travel through 11 years of closed doors, two-fingered touches and silvery little laughs, all the way down to the 9-year-old girl with the small trunk. Say yes, her aunt's eyes commanded across the room. Say it is your choice. Charlotte had said yes for 11 years. She looked at the Duke of Ravenmere, and she said nothing at all. And her silence was the loudest thing in the house. The Duke turned. He walked back through the hallway, back into the grand dining room, where 12 guests sat frozen over their plates, but he did not sit down. He stood behind his chair and addressed Lord Harrow in a calm, pleasant, terrifying voice. My lord, I find I cannot eat. Lord Harrow half rose. Your Grace, is something wrong with the... There is a lady in this house eating supper at a children's table, said the Duke, while a chair at the family's table stands empty. I confess it has quite ruined my appetite. He let that sit in the silence for a moment. Then, softly, I will not sit without her. Somewhere down the table, a guest's fork clattered against china. Lady Harrow gave a breathless little laugh. Your Grace, surely, it is a family matter, a trifle. Charlotte is not, she is not dressed for company. Then we shall wait, said the Duke, and pulled out his own chair and remained standing behind it, while she dresses. It was not a request. Dukes do not make requests. Half the county owed Lord Harrow's bank notes to Ravenmere's estates, and every person at that table knew it. Lord Harrow's face did something complicated, rage, fear, and calculation, all pressed beneath a host's smile. He turned to his wife. My dear, he said through his teeth, fetch Charlotte. They put her in one of Arabella's old gowns, dark green, 2 seasons out of fashion, hastily pinned at the waist because Charlotte was slimmer than her cousin. Mrs. Higgins, the old nanny, fixed her hair with trembling hands and whispered, 11 years, my girl, 11 years, and God finally looked down at this house. It's only a dinner, Charlotte whispered back. No, said Mrs. Higgins, it isn't. When Charlotte entered the grand dining room, 12 strangers turned to stare, and her aunt's voice sliced through the silence like a blade wrapped in lace. Ah, here she is, our dear Charlotte, my husband's ward, a distant relation, very distant. Sit there, dear, at the end. Here, said the Duke of Ravenmere, and pulled out the empty chair. The chair beside his own. The walk down the length of that table was the longest of Charlotte's life. She could feel Arabella's stare burning her borrowed gown. She could feel her uncle's smile turning to stone. She sat, and the Duke sat, and dinner resumed like a play where all the actors had forgotten their lines. But the Duke had not forgotten his. He asked questions, simple, polite, direct, and every question landed in the family like a spark on dry straw. Have you always lived at Harrow Hall, Miss Charlotte? Since she was a child, Lady Harrow answered brightly. So long, we hardly remember a time without her. And where did you live before? Oh, far away, said Lord Harrow, waving his hand. The pheasant, your Grace, is from our own woods. You have a lovely laugh. the Duke said to Charlotte quietly as the conversation clattered on around them. "I heard it through the wall. Where does a woman learn to laugh like that in a house like this?" Charlotte looked down at her plate. "From the children, Your Grace. They haven't yet learned that I'm supposed to be invisible." She said it lightly. She had meant it as a joke, the small, safe kind of joke invisible people learn to make. The Duke did not smile. Something in his jaw tightened, and for a moment, Charlotte saw pure, cold fury pass behind his eyes, not at her, but for asterisk her, and it frightened her more than 11 years of her uncle's smiles. "Forgive me," she whispered, "that was improper." "No," said the Duke of Ravenmere. "That was the first honest sentence anyone has spoken at this table all evening." The dinner ended. The guests flowed toward the hall in a river of silk and candlelight, and the Duke's carriage was called. Lord Harrow walked him to the door personally, talking of hunting parties and future visits, his voice bright with relief that the evening was ending. At the threshold, the Duke stopped. He turned past Lord Harrow, past Lady Harrow, past Arabella in her blue gown, to where Charlotte stood at the very edge of the gathering, half in shadow, already returning to invisibility like a lamp being turned down. He crossed to her. He took her hand, and he bowed over it slowly, properly, in front of everyone, the way a duke bows to a lady of rank, not to a poor relation in a borrowed gown. "Thank you," he said, "for saving my appetite." A nervous ripple of laughter from the guests, but the Duke was not finished. Still holding her hand, his voice lower now, meant for her alone but not quite quiet enough to hide. "Tell me, miss, forgive me, I never learned your family name. What was your father's?" "The Rhodes, Your Grace," Lord Harrow's voice boomed out, sudden and hearty, as he swept between them like a curtain closing. "The rain has made them treacherous, and the hour is late. We mustn't keep you a moment longer." The Duke's eyes stayed on Charlotte for one heartbeat more. Then he released her hand, bid the family good night, and walked out into the rain. And as his carriage rolled away from Harrow Hall, the Duke of Ravenmere sat in the dark, staring at nothing, hearing one thing over and over in his mind. Not the dinner, not the empty chair. A dead man's voice, 11 years old, whispering from a battlefield tent. "Find my daughter, find Charlotte." To understand what happened next, you must first understand what happened 11 years ago, in a place very far from silver candlesticks and pheasant dinners. You must understand the mud. 11 years ago, the Duke of Ravenmere was not yet a duke. He was Major Nathaniel Grey, 24 years old, second son of a duke, the spare, not the heir sent to war the way second sons often were, with a fine horse, a fine uniform, and a father who shook his hand instead of embracing him. And on a gray, rain-soaked morning that Nathaniel would see in his dreams for the rest of his life, his fine horse was shot from under him. His fine uniform was soaked in blood, some of it his own, and he lay trapped in the mud of a broken field while the battle rolled over him like a wave. He should have died there, he knew it. Every man who was there knew it. He did not die because of one man. Captain Edward Ashford, a lean, quiet officer 15 years his senior, with kind eyes and no fortune and no famous name, came back for him. Alone. Through the smoke. Captain Ashford dragged the future Duke of Ravenmere out of the mud by his collar, threw him over his own shoulder and carried him 300 yards under fire, and when a musket ball tore into the captain's side halfway there, he did not stop. He did not stop. Nathaniel woke in a field hospital 2 days later. His first question was about the man who had carried him. The surgeon simply looked at him, and Nathaniel understood. They let him sit with Captain Ashford at the end because the captain had asked for him. Edward Ashford lay on a narrow cot, gray-faced, his breath thin, and Nathaniel would never forget this, completely calm, as if dying were simply one more duty and he intended to do it properly. "Major," the captain whispered, I'm going to ask something of you. It isn't fair of me. You owe me nothing." "I owe you everything," said Nathaniel. "Ask." The captain's hand moved weakly against his chest, toward the inside pocket of his coat. Nathaniel reached in and drew out a small gold locket, its surface worn smooth from years of touching. He opened it. Inside was the miniature portrait of a woman, young, gentle-faced, with warm eyes and a particular way of smiling, as if she had just heard something funny and was trying to be polite about it. "My wife," said Edward Ashford. "God took her 2 years ago, and that exact face is waiting for me in England, my daughter, Charlotte. She is 9 years old, Major, and when I left she stood at the gate and did not cry because I told her soldier's daughters wave instead." His breath caught. For the first time his calm cracked, and underneath it was an ocean. "She waved until the road turned." "Captain, listen to me." The dying man's fingers closed around Nathaniel's wrist with impossible strength. "She goes to my wife's sister, Harrow, Lord Harrow. He manages my affairs. My Charlotte is not a poor man's daughter, Major, whatever she may be told. Her mother's land's my own, it is all hers, all of it. I wrote it, I signed it. Pennygrove has," a cough tore through him and he fought it down with pure will. "Promise me, find my daughter, tell her that her father did not forget her. Not for 1 hour, and see that she receives what is hers. Promise me." "I promise," said Nathaniel Gray. "On my life, on my name, I promise." Edward Ashford looked at him for a long moment. Then he smiled, and in that smile Nathaniel saw the daughter waving at the gate, and he closed his eyes, and by morning he was gone. They buried him under a foreign sky. Nathaniel kept the locket. It took Nathaniel 2 more years to come home. The war did not release men simply because they had promises to keep. When he finally returned to England, he found his father dying and his older brother already dead of a fever. And so the spare became the heir, and the heir became the Duke of Ravenmere, and suddenly Nathaniel Gray owned half a county and had time for nothing at all. But he did not forget. Whatever else can be said of the Duke of Ravenmere, let this be said too: he did not forget. He wrote to Lord Harrow. A careful, formal letter. He had served with the late Captain Ashford. He wished to pay his respects to the captain's daughter, Miss Charlotte Ashford, and to discuss certain matters concerning her late father's estate. The answer took 5 weeks to arrive. The Duke remembered everything about that letter: the heavy cream paper, the elegant hand, the black wax seal, and the words. Above all, the words. "It grieves me deeply to inform your grace that my dear niece Charlotte was taken from us this past winter by a fever in her 13th year. She rests now beside her mother. As for the estate, all matters were long ago settled and lawfully concluded. I thank your grace for honoring the memory of my late brother-in-law, and I trust this closes the matter." I trust this closes the matter. The Duke had read the letter 3 times. Then he had sat alone in his study for the whole of a night, with the locket open on the desk before him, and in the morning he had written back a short letter of condolence, and he had closed the matter. What else could he do? Men lie about many things. Surely, no man lies about a child's grave. For 8 years the locket lay in the top drawer of his desk. For 8 years the promise lay with it, not broken, he told himself. Just, finished, unkeepable. Sometimes at dinners when he watched other men's daughters laugh, an old, quiet ache would move through him like weather in a healed wound. The daughter of the man who carried him through the fire, dead at 13 in her uncle's house, while Nathaniel had been too late, too far, too busy becoming a duke. That was the wound the Duke of Ravenmere carried into Harrow Hall on that October evening, buried so deep he no longer felt it. And then a door opened, and a woman in a gray dress looked up from a children's table with a spoon in her hand. And she had her mother's face. Not a similar face, not a family resemblance. The face from the locket, the warm eyes, and that particular smile, as if she had just heard something funny and was trying to be polite about it. 11 years the Duke had carried that face in a gold circle the size of a coin, and now it was sitting in front of a small fire, alive, laughing, wearing mended gray wool, in the house of the man who had written, in an elegant hand, under a black wax seal. She rests now beside her mother. The carriage rocked through the rain, away from Harrow Hall. The Duke sat motionless in the dark, and in his mind the pieces moved and turned and locked together, one by one, like the workings of a terrible clock. A woman called only Charlotte, a family that would not let her speak, a surname no one would say aloud, an uncle who had leapt between them like a man stopping a bullet over one simple question: what was your father's name? And beneath it all, quiet as a heartbeat, her mother's land's my own, it is all hers, all of it. The Duke rapped twice on the carriage roof. It slowed. Change of direction, he called to the coachman. London tonight. Tonight, your grace, it's near midnight. Then we shall arrive by morning. By dawn, the Duke of Ravenmere was standing in the private office of Mr. Everett Crane, the sharpest, most discreet, most expensive lawyer in London, still in his traveling coat, rein on his shoulders, the little gold locket lying open on the desk between them. I want 3 things, said the Duke. Quietly, tell no one. Mr. Crane dipped his pen. First, every record you can find of the estate of the late Captain Edward Ashford, his lands, his wife's inheritance, his will, if one was ever filed. Second, the name of every solicitor who ever worked for that family. The Duke paused, and his voice went very quiet. And third, Mr. Crane, I want to know exactly whose pockets the Ashford fortune has been flowing into for the last 11 years. Mr. Crane looked up over his spectacles. And if the trail leads somewhere, unpleasant, your grace. The Duke of Ravenmere picked up the locket and closed it gently in his fist. Then follow it, he said, all the way to the end. The letter arrived at Harrow Hall 3 days later, on paper so fine it seemed to glow, sealed with the crest of Ravenmere. Lady Harrow opened it at breakfast with trembling, triumphant fingers, and read it aloud before she had read it to herself. That was her mistake. The Duke of Ravenmere requests the pleasure of Lord and Lady Harrow's company at Ravenmere Hall this Saturday next for dinner. Her voice soared, together with Miss Arabella. It soared higher, and Miss Charlotte, without whom. Lady Harrow stopped reading. The silence at the breakfast table stretched so long that a footman by the door risked a glance at his own reflection in the silver coffee pot, just to confirm the world still existed. Without whom, Lord Harrow repeated slowly, what? Lady Harrow's lips barely moved. Without whom his grace fears the evening would be incomplete. Arabella set down her teacup with a crack. Incomplete. Charlotte makes his evening incomplete. She sat beside him for one dinner in my old green gown and— Be quiet, said Lord Harrow very softly, and Arabella was quiet, because when her father used that voice everyone was. He rose and walked to the window and stood with his hands behind his back, and anyone watching only his shoulders would have thought him calm, but his knuckles were white. Here is what Lord Harrow was thinking, though he said none of it aloud. He was thinking of certain debts in London that his wife knew nothing about. He was thinking of certain investments that had gone to the bottom of the sea, sometimes literally. He was thinking that the Ashford money, the great, quiet river of it that had kept Harrow Hall golden for 11 years, was no longer a river. It was a stream, and he was thinking that a son-in-law like the Duke of Ravenmere would solve everything forever. To refuse the invitation was impossible. To accept it meant putting Charlotte in a room with the one man in England who asked questions. We accept, he said at last, all of us. He turned from the window and his smile was back, smooth as ever. After all, what does the girl actually know? And that was the thing, the beautiful, terrible thing that made the whole crime work. Charlotte knew nothing. You cannot let a secret slip if you have never been told the secret. For 11 years, her ignorance had been their best lock. Why should Saturday be any different? They gave Charlotte a new gown for the first time in her adult life, deep blue, made quickly by the village seamstress, and Charlotte understood without being told that the gown was not a kindness. It was a costume. A poor relation in mended gray raises questions at a duke's table. A quietly dressed, unremarkable cousin does not. The night before the visit, Lady Harrow came to Charlotte's small room in the north wing, sat on the only chair, and delivered her instructions in the tone of a woman reciting scripture. You will speak when spoken to and briefly. You will not discuss family matters. If His Grace asks about your parents, your mother was my dear sister, God rest her, and your father. The pause was less than a heartbeat, but Charlotte heard it was a soldier. An ordinary soldier of no consequence who left you nothing. Is that clear? Charlotte looked at her aunt in the candlelight, and for the first time in 11 years, she asked a question back. Was he? Lady Harrow went very still. Was he what? Of no consequence. Something moved behind her aunt's eyes, something quick and cold like a fish under ice. Then the silvery laugh, a beat too late. Good heavens, child, what a question. Would you be eating at my table if he had left you anything? Sleep. You look gray when you don't sleep. The door clicked shut. Charlotte sat on her narrow bed for a long time, listening to her own heart. The pause asterisk, she thought. Why did she pause? Ravenmere Hall did not look like a house. It looked like a city that had decided to become a house. Charlotte, pressed to the carriage window despite herself, counted 40 windows before giving up. The Duke received them in the great hall, and he was flawless, attentive to Lord Harrow, gracious to Lady Harrow, generous with compliments for Arabella's gown, so generous that Arabella glowed and Lady Harrow began, silently, to plan a wedding. To Charlotte, he offered only a bow and a single, correct sentence of welcome. For one strange, hollow moment, Charlotte thought, I imagine it all. I am invisible here too. She was wrong. She had simply never watched a hunter work. The dinner was magnificent, and the Duke steered it like a coachman steers a team smoothly, with invisible hands. And then, as the party moved toward the drawing room, it happened. A word to Lord Harrow about a rare atlas, a signal to the butler, and somehow, without anyone quite deciding it, Lord Harrow and Lady Harrow were being escorted by the housekeeper to view the famous long gallery. Arabella was seated at the grand piano she had strategically mentioned twice, and Charlotte. Charlotte was standing in the Duke's library, alone with the Duke of Ravenmere, in front of a fire the size of her bedroom door. Miss Charlotte, his voice was different here, quieter. I owe you an apology. I have been ignoring you all evening. I noticed, Your Grace. It slipped out before she could stop it, and she froze, but the Duke laughed. A real laugh, short and surprised, and she thought, he doesn't do that often. I ignored you, he said, because I did not want your family to see how much I wished to speak with you. He gestured to a chair by the fire. Please, sit. She sat, spine straight, hands folded. A woman braced for a blow, because in her experience, attention was simply the light that came before the shadow. Your father was a soldier, the Duke said. Not a question. Charlotte's folded hands tightened. Briefly, speak briefly. Yes, Your Grace, an ordinary soldier of no consequence. The Duke looked at her for a long moment, and something in his face made her feel ashamed of the words, as if she had spat on something holy without knowing it. How much do you remember of him? He asked softly. Very little. I was 7 when he went to the war. She stared into the fire. A brown coat, big hands, and she stopped. And why did she tell him? She never spoke of it. Not to Mrs. Higgins, not to the children, not to anyone. But the fire was warm, and the room smelled of leather and rain, and the Duke of Ravenmere was looking at her as if she were the only clock in a room full of paintings. A song, Charlotte said. There was a song he sang me at bedtime. I only remember one line. I've hummed it my whole life and I don't even know the rest." She smiled, embarrassed, and hummed it, 5 small notes, worn smooth like a pebble carried for years. "Sleep, my wren, the stars are kind." And the Duke of Ravenmere, looking straight into her eyes, sang the line back to her, and then the next one. "Sleep, my wren, the stars are kind. The dark is deep, but love will find." The room tilted. Charlotte was on her feet without knowing she had risen, one hand pressed to her mouth, her heart slamming against her ribs like a bird against glass. How her voice broke. She tried again in a whisper. "That song. No one knows that song. How do you know that song?" The Duke rose too. He was very pale now and very gentle, the way people are gentle around something that might shatter. "Because a man sang it," he said quietly, "in a field hospital 11 years ago. He sang it to the canvas ceiling over and over the whole of his last night. And when I asked him what it was, he said, 'It is how my daughter falls asleep.'" The Duke took one step closer. "Miss Ashford, Charlotte, there is something I must tell you about your father, and it begins with this. He was not, for one single hour of his life, a man of no consequence." The library door opened. "There you are," Arabella swept in, all blue silk and bright suspicion, her smile stretched wide. "Mama is asking for you, Charlotte. Your Grace, you simply must hear the new sonata. I've been saving it." Charlotte barely heard her. Because Arabella had dressed for the evening with special care, new gown, new gloves, and glittering at her throat on a velvet ribbon, brought out tonight of all nights to impress a duke. A locket, gold with a border of tiny pearls and a hairline scratch across the back that Charlotte could not possibly see from across the room, and did not need to see, because she had made that scratch herself, as a small child, clumsy on her mother's lap. Her dead mother's locket. The one thing Lady Harrow had sworn, 11 years ago, with tears in her eyes, had been lost. Charlotte did not remember the sonata. She did not remember saying goodbye to the Duke, though she must have, and she did not remember climbing into the carriage. She remembered only 2 things, circling each other in her mind like 2 hawks. He was not, for one single hour of his life, a man of no consequence. And the locket. The carriage rolled through the dark, lamps swaying. Lord Harrow dozed in his corner. Lady Harrow was conducting a glowing review of the evening, the Duke's attentions to Arabella, the size of the chandeliers, the certainty, the absolute certainty asterisk, that an offer was coming. Arabella sat wrapped in her cloak, smiling out the window at her own future. Charlotte heard none of it. She was watching the little golden shape at her cousin's throat catch the lamplight, disappear, and catch it again. "That locket," she said. Her voice was quiet, but it stopped Lady Harrow mid-sentence, the way a single wrong note stops a song. Arabella's hand rose to her throat. "What about it?" "It's lovely," Charlotte said. "Where does it come from?" "It was a gift from Mama." Arabella shrugged, already bored. "Years ago. Why?" "May I see it?" "You may not. You'll get finger marks on." "It has a scratch on the back," Charlotte said, "thin as a hair, shaped like a fish hook, left side near the hinge." The carriage went very quiet. The wheels turned, the lamps swayed. Arabella, frowning, slid the locket around on its ribbon, tilted it toward the lamp, and stopped. Her frown flickered. She turned it back quickly. "Lots of old things have scratches." "I made that scratch," Charlotte said. "I was 3. I was sitting on my mother's lap playing with her locket, and I caught it on her brooch, and I cried because I thought I'd ruined it. And my mother laughed and said—" Charlotte's voice did not tremble. That was the strangest part. It came out flat and clear as ice. Asterisk, "Now it will always be a little bit yours." Arabella's mouth opened. Nothing came out. For one unguarded moment she looked at her own mother, a child's look, asking a question. And Lady Harrow laughed, the silvery laugh right on time. What a memory you have, Charlotte, 3 years old. Darling, one scratch looks very like another. That locket was bought in London. I remember the shop on Bond Street. Really, all this fuss over trinkets, you overtire yourself, you always do. Close your eyes. We'll be home within the hour. The subject was closed. In that family, Lady Harrow closed subjects the way other people closed doors. You could hear the click. Charlotte leaned back and closed her eyes as instructed. Behind them, she thought, my mother's locket which was lost, my father's song which a duke knows, my aunt's pause which lasted less than a heartbeat. 3 small things, small as hairpins. But you can open any lock in the world with a hairpin if you have learned patience. And Charlotte Ashford had spent 11 years learning nothing else. She could not sleep. Past midnight, Harrow Hall lay dark and still, and Charlotte lay in her narrow bed in the north wing, eyes open, assembling and reassembling the evening until her head ached. At last she rose, wrapped her shawl around her nightgown, and slipped downstairs toward the kitchen. Mrs. Higgins kept warm milk on the back of the stove for the children, and Charlotte had earned, at least, the privileges of a child. The way to the kitchen led past the gallery. The gallery led past the study. And under the study door at midnight lay a blade of yellow light. Charlotte would have walked past. 11 years of training said, walk past, see nothing, hear nothing, be nothing. But as she drew level with the door, she heard her own name, and no power on earth walks past its own name. Charlotte asked about the locket, in the carriage, in front of Arabella. Her aunt's voice, but wrong, stripped of all its silver, low and hard, a voice Charlotte had never heard her use. So, her uncle, the clink of a decanter. She asks about a locket, you bought it on Bond Street, done. She described the scratch, Henry, the scratch on the back. She hasn't seen that locket since she was 5 years old. A pause, the fire cracked. And it isn't only the locket. Lady Harrow's voice dropped further. Charlotte pressed herself against the cold wall, closer to the door frame, her heart so loud she was sure they would hear it through the oak. It's him. He had her alone in the library. I don't care what Arabella says about atlases and sonatas. He arranged it. He asks about her father. He asks about her name asterisk. Henry, at his own table, he watched her the entire evening the way a man watches a door he intends to walk through. He watched a pretty face. Men do. Men do not rearrange a dinner party for a poor relation. A sharp breath, she gathered herself. The Duke asks too many questions. I want her gone. Cousin Agnes in Scotland, we write tomorrow. We say the girl's nerves need rest, and she stays there until this is settled. Until February at the least. Once he's offered for Arabella, once the papers are signed, he can ask whatever he likes. It will be his own family's scandal to bury then. Silence. The kind of silence in which a man swirls a glass and stares into a fire. Very well, said Lord Harrow at last. Scotland, but you fret too much, my dear, you always have. Think, even if the man asks his questions, even if he digs, what is there to find? Pennygrove is a frightened old rabbit in a burrow in Milford. He hasn't made a sound in a decade. The papers say what I had them say, and the girl herself. He laughed. It was a warm, comfortable, after-dinner sort of laugh, and it was the cruelest sound Charlotte had ever heard. The girl herself is the best proof of all. 11 years in this house, and she thanks us for it. She mends pillowcases. She eats with the children. Good God, Margaret, that girl doesn't even know that the table she eats at belongs to her. The table, the room it stands in, the roof over the room. Another swallow, another clink. And she never will, now come to bed. Charlotte did not remember climbing the stairs. She found herself sitting on the floor of her small room in the north wing, her back against the bed, her shawl fallen somewhere, staring at the wall by the light of the moon, and the wall stared back, and everything was rearranging itself. The table belongs to her. The table, the room, the roof. Her father, ordinary soldier, no consequence, left you nothing had left her. All of this. The hall she was hidden in. The garden she was allowed to walk in on the paths if guests were not expected. The silver she was not trusted near. The chair, the asterisk chair at the children's table, even that was hers. They had not taken her in. They had moved into her house, her lands, her life. And for 11 years, they had made her a beggar at her own table. And the most exquisite cruelty of it, the masterpiece, was that they had made her grateful. Charlotte sat on the floor until the moon crossed the window. She did not cry. She kept waiting to cry and it kept not coming, and slowly she understood that what she felt was too old and too large for crying. Grief is for what you have lost. This was for what had been asterisk taken, and taken things, unlike lost things, can be found. Somewhere below, a clock struck 3. Pennygrove asterisk, she thought. A frightened old rabbit in a burrow in Milford. She said the name to herself once, twice, 3 times, pressing it into her memory the way you press a flower into a book. Then Charlotte Ashford got up off the floor of the smallest bedroom in her own house and looked out at the dark lawns of her own estate and made the first plan of her life. They were sending her to Scotland. She had until then. Mrs. Higgins was shelling peas in the kitchen garden when Charlotte found her the next morning, and one look at Charlotte's face made the old nanny's hands go still over the bowl. "You know," said Mrs. Higgins, "it was not a question." "I know that this house is mine," Charlotte said quietly. "I heard it from my uncle's own mouth, through his study door at midnight. What I don't know is everything else, and I think you do. I think you have known for 11 years. The bowl of peas trembled. Mrs. Higgins set it down on the bench very carefully, as if it were the thing shaking and not her hands, and when she looked up, her eyes were already wet. "Every night," she whispered, "every night for 11 years I have said a prayer for your mother, God rest her, and every night I have been afraid to look at her picture in my mind. Because what would I tell her? That I watched them do it, and I served the dinners, and I said nothing. Then say something now." And there, on a bench in the kitchen garden, between a bowl of peas and a row of winter cabbages, the truth finally came out in pieces, in whispers, with the old woman's eyes darting to the windows of the great house the whole time. "I came to this house with your mother when she married your father, her nanny first, then yours. So I was here child the autumn the letter came saying the captain had fallen. And I was here 3 weeks after when the men came from London. Lawyers' men. There was a will, Charlotte, your father's will. I know because the whole house knew the servants' hall talks, it always talks, everything to you. The hall, the farms, your mother's lands in the south, all of it, held in trust until you married or came of age. And your uncle named as trustee, guardian of you and steward of what was yours." Her mouth twisted. "Steward. There's a word he wore like other men wear a coat." "Then how?" "Slowly." Mrs. Higgins looked at her hands. "That's how, child, slowly and with papers. Nothing was done in a day. First he was managing your affairs. Then he was consolidating them. I heard him say that word to your aunt, consolidating, and she repeated it at dinners like it was French. Farms sold to cover expenses of the estate. Accounts moved. And then one year, you'd have been 13, there came a new set of lawyers' men, a new set of papers, and after that no one spoke of trusts anymore. After that it was simply Lord Harrow's house and had always been, and you were the poor relation and had always been. A lie needs 10 years to grow skin, Charlotte. Theirs has had 11. 13. The number went through Charlotte like a cold needle, though she would not understand why until later. She did not yet know about a letter on cream paper, sealed in black wax, informing a duke that she had died at exactly that age. "The will," Charlotte said, "the real one, where is it?" "If it still breathes anywhere, it breathes in his safe. The study. Behind the painting of the horse, no, don't look at me like that. Every servant in this house knows where the safe is. We simply pretend we don't, the same way we pretend the master's port isn't watered. A ghost of the old nanny humor gone as fast as it came. But hear me, child. Papers in that safe have a way of visiting the fire. If he ever feels a hand near his collar, that won't see morning. Then the safe can't be the only place. Charlotte leaned closer. Last night my uncle said a name, Pennygrove. He said Pennygrove is a frightened old rabbit in a burrow in Milford. Who is Pennygrove? Mrs. Higgins went very still. Mr. Josiah Pennygrove, she said slowly, was your father's solicitor, your grandfather's before him. A small, careful, honest man. He came to your christening, child. He brought a silver spoon. He drew up your father's will with his own hand, and by law and custom, a solicitor keeps. She stopped. Her eyes widened very slightly. A copy, Charlotte breathed. A copy. The old woman gripped Charlotte's wrist. But listen, after that 13th year, after the new papers, Mr. Pennygrove was finished, dismissed. And not just dismissed, ruined quietly. Word went round he'd been careless with clients' money. No one in the county would use him after. He shut his office and crawled into that cottage in Milford and hasn't put his head above ground since. That was no accident, Charlotte. That was a warning. Your uncle broke him like you'd break a dog. To be sure he'd never bark. Broken dogs remember who broke them. And fear the stick forever after. Mrs. Higgins looked at her, at the straight back, the level eyes, the stillness, and something in the old woman's face shifted, halfway between fear and wonder. Lord above, you have your father's look on you. That's exactly his face, the day he child. What is it you mean to do? Charlotte stood and brushed off her skirt. They're sending me to Scotland to bury me until February, she said. I mean to go to Milford first. 40 miles away. In a private office in London, Mr. Everett Crane laid a single sheet of paper on the desk in front of the Duke of Ravenmere. 11 years, Your Grace, compressed to one page. You asked where the Ashford fortune has been flowing. The answer is, through a hole in the law, directly into Lord Harrow's pocket, but a hole cut so neatly that from the outside, the wall looks whole. Trusteeship converted to ownership across 4 years and perhaps 40 documents. Farms sold at half value to buyers who resold them at full value a year later, and those buyers, when you dig, are Harrow's own creditors. It is theft, Your Grace, patient theft of the highest craftsmanship, and with what we currently hold, no court in England will touch it. Why not? Because every one of those 40 documents bears signatures, seals, and witnesses. To beat paper, Your Grace, you need better paper. Crane tapped the sheet. You need the original will or the man who wrote it, ideally both. The will names the girl, the man proves the fraud, and there at last one small candle. The Ashford family solicitor was one Josiah Pennygrove, dismissed 11 years ago, professionally destroyed shortly after in a manner I would call surgical. He is alive, Your Grace. Retired, silent, and by every account frightened of his own shadow. Where? A village called Milford, 2 days' ride from Harrow Hall. The Duke was already standing, already reaching for his coat. Then I ride today. Your Grace, Crane removed his spectacles, which for Mr. Crane was the equivalent of shouting. One caution, and I beg you weigh it. The moment Harrow suspects, one whisper, one servant's tale, one glimpse of your carriage on the Milford Road, that safe will be opened, and England's finest evidence will warm his study for half an hour. Whatever you do, it must be done quietly, and it must be done complete. If you pull this thread halfway, Your Grace, the man will simply cut it, and the girl will be left worse than before, branded a schemer, or worse. The Duke stood in the doorway, and thought of a woman in a gray dress at a children's table, and of a dying man's grip on his wrist. Then we pull it all the way, he said. Find me everything on those 40 documents. I'll bring you Pennygrove. But it was already Wednesday. And at Harrow Hall that same evening, Lady Harrow stood at her bedroom window, watching Charlotte cross the garden below, watching her stop by the kitchen bench, and stand a moment where old Higgins had sat shelling peas that morning. And something in the girl's walk, something new, something straight-backed made Lady Harrow's fingers tighten slowly on the curtain. She had planned the Scotland letter for tomorrow, the departure for next week. She turned from the window and rang the bell, and when the housekeeper appeared, Lady Harrow's voice was silver and smooth and pleasant, and each word fell like a coin. Charlotte's health can't wait for next week. The poor girl's nerves are in shreds, anyone can see it. Have her things packed tonight. The carriage will be at the door at first light. The housekeeper hesitated. First light, my lady, tomorrow. Tomorrow, said Lady Harrow and smiled. Before breakfast. Journeys are so much easier on an empty stomach. The housekeeper came for Charlotte's things at 8 o'clock that evening. First light, miss, the woman said, not meeting her eyes, folding Charlotte's 3 gray dresses with more care than they had ever been shown. Her ladyship's orders, Scotland. I'm to pack everything. Everything took 1 trunk, and the trunk was not full. Charlotte stood at her window as the house went dark, room by room, and did the arithmetic of her life once more. Scotland at first light. February at the earliest, her aunt had said, but exiles have a way of forgetting the road home. And by February, Arabella would be betrothed to the Duke, and the walls around the lie would be higher than ever, and the one man who asked questions would be family, their family. If ever there was a night, it was this one. She waited until the last candle died in the servants' wing, until the great clock in the hall struck 1. Then Charlotte Ashford took off her shoes and carried them in one hand, and went down through her own dark house like a ghost, past the gallery, past the portraits of other people's ancestors hanging on her walls, to the study door. It was not locked. It was never locked. Lord Harrow believed in his own safety the way kings do. Inside, moonlight leather, cold ash in the grate. The painting of the horse hung over the sideboard, huge and self-satisfied. Charlotte set down her shoes, gripped the gilded frame with both hands, and swung it gently away from the wall. And there it was, a door of black iron set into the stone, a brass dial, a keyhole beneath. Behind that little iron door, she was certain of it now, certain in her bones, lay her father's will. His signature, his voice on paper, everything to my daughter. 11 years of her life, 4 inches away, behind a lock she could not open. She tried the handle anyway. You always try the handle. It did not move. Of course it did not move. She stood in the dark with her hand on the cold iron, and for one moment she allowed herself to imagine the safe open, the paper in her hands. The study door clicked. Light leapt up the walls, and Lord Harrow's voice, warm and unhurried and horribly pleased, filled the room like smoke. "Do you know," he said, lifting his lamp, "the housekeeper told my wife you'd gone to bed without supper. And my wife said, she's clever, my wife, far cleverer than I, she said. Check the study, Henry. Tonight of all nights, check the study." Charlotte turned to face him, her back to the safe, her stockinged feet cold on her father's floor. "That's safe," she said. Her voice came out level. "Open it. Open it here in front of me and show me there's no paper inside with my father's name on it, and I will get in that carriage tomorrow and never say another word." For just a moment, a flicker, a hairline crack, something moved behind Lord Harrow's eyes. Then it was gone, sealed over, and he smiled and pulled the bell rope by the door. "You're right about one thing, my dear," he said. "Tomorrow, everyone will see exactly what you are." They locked her in her room, and in the morning Charlotte discovered why the carriage had not come at first light after all. It had been delayed, because an audience takes time to gather. They brought her down at 10 o'clock into the great hall, and the great hall was full. The servants lined up as if for prayers, Mrs. Higgins gray-faced among them. Lady Harrow seated, a handkerchief ready in her hand like an actress holding her script, Arabella by the window, and Charlotte's stomach dropped. Guests, the vicar's wife, old Lady Bexley from across the valley who could carry a story to every drawing room in 3 counties faster than the post, Squire Morton and his sister, witnesses. Invited witnesses, dressed for morning calls, seated in a row with cups of chocolate, and on every face the bright, hungry look of people who have been promised a scandal with their refreshments. Charlotte, Lord Harrow stood in the center of the room, sorrowful, magnificent, a man performing the saddest duty of his life. Last night you were found past 1 o'clock in my study, in the dark, at my safe. A gasp ran along the row of chocolate cups. I asked myself all night what you could have wanted there, he went on mournfully. And this morning I am afraid we found the answer. Mrs. Reeves, if you please. The housekeeper came forward, and she was crying, and she would not look at Charlotte, and in her outstretched hands lay Charlotte's own small traveling trunk. Open, her 3 gray dresses neatly folded within. And on top of them, glittering like ice on ash, a diamond bracelet. My bracelet. Lady Harrow rose, pressed the handkerchief to her mouth, and swayed a sway calibrated to the inch. Henry, that's my bracelet, your mother's bracelet. The hall dissolved into murmurs. The vicar's wife had her hand at her throat. Lady Bexley was leaning forward so far she was in danger of leaving her chair entirely, committing every detail to memory. The orphan, the safe, the diamonds in the trunk, my dear, in her very trunk. I have never touched that bracelet. Charlotte's voice was quiet and it was steady, and no one in that hall was listening to it. That was the design, she understood. That had always been the design. 11 years of shy, poor thing prefers to eat with the children had built her a reputation of exactly the right shape. A nothing, a nobody, a charity girl. And charity girls who are caught at safes in the night do not get listened to. They get explained. Ungrateful, someone whispered. After everything this family, whispered someone else. Squire Morton said, shocking, comfortably, and reached for another biscuit. Lord Harrow raised his hand for silence and got it. There will be no magistrate, he announced nobly, brokenly. No charges. She is my late wife's sister's child. His voice caught an artist's touch, and blood is blood, whatever it does. She will go north today to a household better suited to correction, and we will speak of this no more. We will bear it as a family in silence. It was perfect. Charlotte stood in the middle of her own great hall and watched it close around her like water, not condemned but forgiven, which was so much worse, because the accused can be defended, but the forgiven are guilty forever. By evening, Lady Bexley would have the story in 6 houses, by Sunday, in 60. If a duke's lawyer ever came asking questions about Miss Ashford, why, every drawing room in the county could tell him what she was. A thief, poor creature, caught with the diamonds in her trunk, and wasn't it saintly of Lord Harrow not to prosecute? She had gone looking for one piece of paper. She had handed them, instead, the final page of their story. The carriage, said Lord Harrow, is waiting. It was raining when they brought her out, a hard, gray, slanting rain, the kind that makes the whole world look like it is being erased. A footman put up an umbrella, but not really. It hovered somewhere behind her left shoulder, protecting no one, a courtesy performed for the watching windows. The hired coach stood black and wet on the gravel, its coachman a stranger, hat down against the rain. Mrs. Higgins had been kept indoors. There were no goodbyes. Charlotte was at the carriage step, one hand on the wet door frame, when she heard hoofbeats on the drive. She turned, everyone turned. Through the rain, on a tall gray horse, in a black riding coat with the rain running off his shoulders, the Duke of Ravenmere. He reined in at the edge of the gravel, perhaps 30 feet away, close enough that she could see his face, and mud on his boots as if he had ridden a very long way, very fast. And everything in Charlotte lifted at once, hope, wild and instant and shameless. Hope like a shout he came, he knows. He'll stop this. The Duke looked at her. Across the rain, across the gravel, across the whole ruin of the morning, his eyes found hers and held them. 1 second, 2, 3. Then the Duke of Ravenmere turned his horse, turned it slowly, deliberately, before all those watching windows, and rode away, back down the drive into the rain without a single word. The footman closed the carriage door. And Charlotte Ashford, who had not wept when they read out her exile, who had not wept at the diamonds in her trunk, who had not wept in 11 years of children's tables, sat alone in the dark of a stranger's coach, pressed both hands to her mouth, and broke. The carriage rolled north. Charlotte cried until somewhere past the second village, and then the crying simply ran out, the way a storm runs out, and she sat hollow and still in the rocking dark and watched the rain crawl sideways across the glass. He looked at me, and he rode away. She had built nothing on the Duke of Ravenmere. She had been careful, so careful not to build. And yet somewhere between a pulled-out chair and 5 notes of a lullaby, a small stubborn room of hope had built itself anyway, without her permission. Now it stood empty, and the wind blew through it, and Charlotte decided, somewhere past the second village, that she would never furnish such a room again. They changed horses at a posting inn as the light died. Charlotte, numb, barely noticed the coachman speaking with 2 men by the stable lantern, barely noticed that when they rolled out again, the coach turned right where the great signpost's white finger pointed left. She noticed 20 minutes later, when the last gray daylight showed her hills that were on the wrong side of the road. She sat up, she rapped on the roof. This is not the North Road. The coach did not slow. Driver, she hammered the roof with her fist now, fear arriving all at once, cold and total, because a disgraced woman in a hired coach on a darkening road belongs to no one, and everyone knows it. Stop this coach. Where are you taking me? Stop the coach. The little hatch behind the driver's seat slid open, and rain and a voice came through it together. A calm, unbothered, oddly respectful voice. Begging your pardon for the fright, miss. My orders are that no harm comes to you, that you're not to be cold, and that you're to be somewhere safe by nightfall. That's the whole of my orders, miss, and I mean to follow all 3. Whose orders? But the hatch had already slid shut. Night came down. The coach ran on through it, smooth and fast, too smooth and too fast for a hired hack, some distant part of her noted. These were somebody's own horses, and then through the streaming window, gates, lamplight on wet iron, a long avenue of old trees, and at the end of it, glowing golden in the rain, a house. Not Ravenmere, smaller, older, beautiful the way grandmother's houses are beautiful. The coach stopped. The door opened, and standing at the top of the steps in the light of the open front door, leaning on an ebony cane, stood a small, upright, white-haired woman in gray silk, who looked Charlotte over from muddy hem to ruined bonnet exactly the way a jeweler looks at a stone that has been badly set. So, said the old woman, you're the girl who's been eating at the children's table. Charlotte, soaked, shaking, wrung out past all courtesy, heard herself say, and you are. Something flashed in the old woman's eyes that might have been approval. I, she said, am the Dowager Duchess of Ravenmere. I am the grandmother of the man who put you in that coach. You are standing in my house, you smell like a wet post road, and there is soup. She turned, cane clicking on the marble. Questions after soup. That is the rule of this house. Come along. You look like a church candle someone left burning through Lent. Now, while Charlotte sits at the dowager's table, not eating her soup, you must hear what happened in Milford, because Charlotte's heart broke on false evidence, and you, at least, deserve the truth of it. The Duke had ridden out of London before dawn on Monday, and he had ridden like a man pursued, changing horses at every stage, sleeping twice for 3 hours in chairs with his boots on. By Wednesday noon he stood in a lane in Milford, in front of a cottage with drawn curtains and a garden gone wild, knocking on a door that did not want to be knocked on. Josiah Pennygrove opened it 3 inches. One eye, a chain, the smell of dust and old paper. "No," said the eye. "Mr. Pennygrove, my name. I know your face from the newspapers, your grace, and the answer is still no. Whatever it is, no." It took an hour on the doorstep, in the wind. It took the words Edward Ashford, and it took the words she is alive. And at those 2 words the chain came off, and the door opened, and the Duke of Ravenmere watched a small, dusty, broken old man sit down abruptly on his own stairs and weep into his hands like a child. "They told me the fever took her," Pennygrove kept saying. "I sent flowers. God forgive me, I sent flowers. I knew, I think, somewhere in me. I knew what they were, and I let myself believe them because believing them was allowed and knowing them was not." In the back room of that cottage, under the floorboards, in a Japan tin box that had once held tea, the copy of the last will and testament of Captain Edward Ashford, written in Pennygrove's own careful hand, witnessed, dated everything to his daughter Charlotte. And beneath it, sealed in yellowed wax, its ink faded to brown, a letter. On the front, in a soldier's writing, "For my daughter, to be given to her with the will." 11 years, that letter had waited under a floor. But when the Duke reached for the tin box, the old solicitor's hands closed over it, and terror came back into his face like weather. "You don't understand what he is," Pennygrove whispered. "One copy, your grace, in my hand against a lord. They'll say I forged it. They said I stole before. The whole county believed it in a fortnight, and that was practice, that was him stretching. A copy proves nothing without the rest, his forgeries, his letters, the papers in that safe. Bring me those, put me before honest lawyers with the originals on the table, and I will testify until my voice goes. But if you strike him and miss, if you give that man 1 hour's warning," the old man's grip tightened on the box, "he will burn the truth in his study fire, finish his brandy, and there will be nothing left in England to say that child was ever robbed. There will only be a mad old rabbit and a thieving orphan and a duke who was fooled by a pretty face. If you pull this thread halfway, the man will simply cut it." Crane's warning, Pennygrove's terror, the same sentence twice from 2 men who had never met. That was the sentence the Duke carried with him on the long, wild ride back, riding through Wednesday night without stopping, because something cold in his chest kept telling him to hurry. That was the sentence in his mouth on Thursday noon, when he came up the drive of Harrow Hall through the rain and saw, with his own eyes, the trap already sprung, the coach, the trunk, the watching windows full of triumphant faces, and her, at the carriage step, turning toward him with her whole heart in her eyes. One shout, that was all it would have taken, and God knew everything in him was shouting, "Ride to her, put her behind him on the horse, take her out of that place in front of all of them." And by nightfall the safe would be empty and the study fire would be warm, and Charlotte Ashford would be, forever, in every drawing room in England, the thief who bewitched a duke. So the Duke of Ravenmere did the hardest thing he had ever done, harder than the war, he would say later, and he would not be exaggerating. He looked into the eyes of the woman at the carriage step. And he turned his horse and rode away. The Dowager told Charlotte none of this. "Not my story to tell," she said maddeningly whenever Charlotte pressed. "Eat." So Charlotte did not eat and did not sleep, and by morning her hollowness had hardened into something with edges. She came down at first light dressed for the road, and found the old woman already at breakfast, as if sleep were a habit she had given up along with dancing. "I am grateful for the roof," Charlotte said, standing, "but I won't be moved about like a parcel any longer. Not by my uncle, not by your grandson. Everyone in my life has arranged where I sit, what I know, what I'm called, and now, it seems, which road my coach takes. Whatever his reasons," her voice cracked, and she hated it and drove on through it, "he looked at me, madam. He looked at me and he rode away, and I have spent 11 years learning exactly what I am worth to people, so believe me, I know that look from the inside. I am leaving. Today." The Dowager Duchess set down her cup and regarded Charlotte for a long moment over it, and her sharp old face was unreadable. "Anger is a good horse," she said at last. "Ride it, child, by all means. Just make certain you are holding the reins and not the tail." She nodded past Charlotte's shoulder toward the window. "Before you go, however, you had better say so to his face. He has been standing in my reign for a quarter of an hour, deciding whether he has the right to knock." Charlotte turned. Through the window, in the gray morning light, she saw the gray horse first, mud to the shoulder, and then the man beside it, bareheaded in the drizzle, still in Thursday's riding coat, looking as if he had not slept since some previous life. She was in the hall before she had decided to move. He came through the door as she reached it, and they stopped, 3 feet apart, and the whole world narrowed to that distance. "You rode away," Charlotte said. "Yes," said the Duke. "You looked at me, and you rode away." "Yes." He did not defend himself. He did not explain. His voice was wrecked with exhaustion and very quiet. "And if you decide 1 hour from now that you cannot forgive it, I will accept that for the rest of my life. But not yet. First, there is something that belongs to you. It has belonged to you for 11 years, and too many people have decided you shouldn't have it, and I will not be the last of them." From inside his coat, wrapped in oilcloth, dry as the day it was sealed, he drew out the letter and laid it gently on the hall table between them, her name upward, in a hand she had not seen since she was 7 years old, and knew instantly, the way you know a voice in the dark. "For my daughter." "Read it," said the Duke of Ravenmere, "and then, if you wish it, you will never have to see me again." They left her alone with it. The Dowager withdrew to her morning room. The Duke walked out into the wet garden, bareheaded, as if rain were a thing that happened to other people. And Charlotte sat down at the hall table in a stranger's house, with 11 years of silence lying in front of her in a soldier's handwriting. Her hands were shaking so badly that she tore the wax in 3 pieces. The paper inside had been folded so long it opened like something waking up. The ink had gone brown. The hand was firm and plain, a man who wrote the way he spoke, without flourishes, and at the sight of the first line, Charlotte heard it. That was the thing she could never afterward explain, not even to him. She did not read the letter. She heard asterisk it in a voice she had thought was lost, a voice from a doorway, from a bedtime, from the top of a road 11 years long. "My Charlotte asterisk. If you are reading this, then I have not kept my promise to come home, and for that I am sorrier than for anything in my life. I write this at my desk the night before I leave, and you are asleep upstairs, and I have already been up twice to look at you, and Mrs. Higgins has already twice pretended not to see me do it. You will be grown when you read this or near it. Mr. Pennygrove has his instructions. This letter comes to you with my will when what is mine becomes yours. And here I must write plainly because I am a plain man. Everything I have is yours, my girl. The hall, the lands, your mother's meadows in the south, every stone and every acre. Your Uncle Harrow will manage it all until you are grown. He is a careful man with accounts, more careful than I ever was, and your aunt is your mother's own sister. They will keep everything safe for you." Charlotte had to stop there. She sat very still, with her hand flat on the paper, and let the wave go through her, because there it was, in her father's own trusting hand, the door through which the thieves had walked. "They will keep everything safe for you." He had handed them the key himself and gone to war easy in his heart, and they had known, for 11 years they had known, that the dead man's trust was the best lock on their lie. She breathed, she read on. "But hear me, Charlotte, because this is the part that matters and land is not it. If everything else is lost, if the hall burns and the meadows flood, you are still the richest thing I ever had a share in making. You have your mother's face. I hope by now someone has told you that, and I hope they've also told you. Her face was the second best thing about her. The laugh was first. Be kind, but do not be quiet. I have watched you already, small as you are, learning to make yourself small for other people's comfort, and it is the only thing about you I would change. Take up room, my girl. Sit at the head of my table, it is your table, and laugh your mother's laugh at it loudly. And if anyone ever tells you that you belong at the foot of it, or the corner of it, or anywhere else at all, remember that your father was a soldier, and soldiers know a war when they see one. Last of all, our song. The wren's song. No living soul knows it but you and I. It was your mother's, and now it is ours. Keep it. And if ever in your life you meet someone who can sing you the second line, be good to them, Charlotte, whoever they are. It will mean they sat close beside me once, close enough to hear my heart. A man only gives that song away with it. Wave until the road turns, my girl. I will be watching longer than that. Your father, Edward Ashford. The Duke of Ravenmere had been standing in the garden for the better part of an hour, in a drizzle that had soaked through his shoulders long ago, when he heard the gravel behind him. He turned. Charlotte stood on the path, no shawl, no bonnet, the letter held against her chest with both hands, rain and the other thing running down her face together. And before he could speak, she asked, in a voice scrubbed down to nothing. He sang it all night. You said he sang it all night at the end. Yes. Was he in pain? The Duke looked at her, and she watched him weigh the kind lie and set it down and choose her instead. Yes, he said quietly, and he sang anyway. He told me, forgive me, I have carried this 11 years waiting to say it, he told me. Tell her that her father did not forget her, not for 1 hour. Those were his words, Miss Ashford. I was to find you and tell you that and see that you received what was yours. He asked, and I promised, and then I believed one letter from a liar and I stopped searching. A dying man carried me 300 yards through fire, and I could not carry a promise 11 years. His voice did not break. It did something worse. It went perfectly flat. You asked me once how I knew your song. That is how. I am the man who was sitting close enough to hear his heart, and I am also the man who failed him. Both things are true, and you are owed both. The rain came down. Somewhere in the hedges, ridiculous and indifferent, a wren was singing. I spent 11 years believing their letters too, Charlotte said at last. Every day was a letter. You are nothing, you were left nothing, be grateful. I believed it with the evidence of my own life in front of me. She looked down at the paper in her hands, then up at him, and something had shifted in her face, the grief still there, but underneath it now, load-bearing, something harder. So I find I can't hate you for believing one letter, Your Grace. They are very good at letters. She stepped past him toward the house and stopped. My father wrote that soldiers know a war when they see one. I see one. You said you go to the end this time. To the end. Good, said Charlotte Ashford. Then you should know that I'm coming with you. They planned it in the Dowager's library over 3 days, and the War Council was the strangest ever assembled in that county. A duke with rain-ruined boots, a London lawyer who removed his spectacles only at moments of great emotion, a trembling old solicitor fetched from Milford under guard and fed by the Dowager until he stopped flinching at doors, the Dowager herself, presiding with her cane like a field marshal's baton, and a disinherited woman in gray, who turned out, to the surprise of everyone but the reader, to have the coldest head at the table. The trap was built from Lord Harrow's own favorite materials, vanity and greed. An invitation went out from Ravenmere, warm as summer. His Grace requested the pleasure of Lord and Lady Harrow and Miss Arabella at dinner, 10 days hence, an intimate evening, a family evening, the letter said, and the phrase matters of a happy and permanent nature appeared in it like a diamond in a shop window. Within 2 days, exactly as intended, every drawing room from Bexley Court to the vicarage had the news. The Duke of Ravenmere was going to offer for Arabella Harrow at last. And with the invitation, a second letter, dry, dull, deadly, from the Duke's men of business, Since the happy matters under discussion would involve the joining of two estates, His Grace's solicitors must, as a formality, verify the deeds and titles of the Harrow holdings prior to any settlement. Lord Harrow was respectfully asked to bring his papers. "He'll smell it," Pennygrove whispered. "He smells everything." "He'll smell nothing," said Crane, polishing his spectacles, "because nothing is what it isn't. Marriage settlements between great estates are built on exactly such verifications. I have drafted 40 of them. Refusing to show his deeds would be the one thing he cannot do. A man who hides his papers from his daughter's bridegroom announces that his papers cannot bear light. No, he will come. He will bring the deeds, the false chain, the whole 11 years of paper, and he will carry them through your Grace's front door with his own hands, smiling." "And the rest of it," said the Dowager. "The will in that safe of his, what stops him burning it the moment he's home, and the ring is on the girl's finger." "He won't be going home," said the Duke quietly. "Not that night. The magistrate rides for Harrow Hall the moment their carriage passes the gates. Mrs. Reeves has sworn her statement, the bracelet, and who gave it to her to place, and what she was told would happen to her son's position if she refused. Mrs. Higgins has sworn hers. The safe will be under seal before the second course." Silence around the table. It was really going to happen. After 11 years, it had a date. "There is one more thing." Charlotte had been quiet a long while, looking at the fire. Now she looked up. "The table. When they come in to dinner, I want a place laid for me. At the table. Not hidden in the gallery, not behind a screen, not brought in at the end like the pudding." Her voice was very calm, and it filled the whole room. "They made me eat with the children in my own house for 11 years. So when it ends at a dinner table and I am sitting at it. Lay me a place, Your Grace. And let them wonder, all through the soup, who it's for." Slowly, magnificently, the Dowager Duchess of Ravenmere began to smile. "Oh, I asterisk her," she said, to no one in particular. "Nathaniel, if you don't marry this girl, I will adopt her." 10 days later, at 7 o'clock exactly, the Harrow carriage rolled up the long avenue of Ravenmere, and everything inside it glittered. Arabella glittered, new gown, silver thread, her mother's diamonds, and at her throat the little gold locket with the pearls, worn tonight of all nights for luck. Lady Harrow glittered with triumph barely held at a simmer, and Lord Harrow, in his finest black, patted the leather document case on his knees the way other men pat a favorite dog, and permitted himself, as the lights of the great house rose over them, one small, private, comfortable smile. The girl was in Scotland. The Duke was in hand. The county had swallowed the bracelet whole. And now the last of it, a signature or two over dinner, a Duke in the family, and the deep, warm, permanent safety of asterisk. It can never come apart now. They were received like royalty. They were walked through the great hall, past the portraits, on a tide of footmen and candlelight, to the doors of the dining room, and the doors were opened before them. The table was beautiful. Silver and white roses, crystal catching flame, a fire like a sunset, and Lord Harrow, out of 11 years of habit, did what he always did with a table. He counted. His smile stopped working before his face did. 3 Harrows, the Duke, the Dowager Duchess, 5. There were 6 places laid. "Your Grace," said Lord Harrow, and his voice came out just a half-tone too high, "I believe your people have set one place too many." "No," said the Duke of Ravenmere pleasantly, moving to the head of the table. "We are expecting one more guest." "One more guest," Lord Harrow repeated. And as if the words were a bell, the far doors of the dining room opened, and the guest came in. For a moment, one full, ringing moment, the Harrows did not recognize her. That was the crowning detail, the one the Dowager had insisted upon with all the ruthlessness of her 80 years. They had never once seen Charlotte Ashford properly dressed. The woman who entered wore deep green silk, and her hair was dressed high, and she carried her head the way her father had carried his across a burning field. And Lady Harrow's first thought, her actual first thought, was, "Who is this beauty and why was I not told of her?" Then the beauty looked at her with Charlotte's eyes. The sound Lady Harrow made was very small, and not silvery at all. "Good evening, Aunt," said Charlotte Ashford. "You'll be relieved to see my nerves are quite recovered." "Charlotte," Lord Harrow's voice came out smooth, "give him this much." The man was iron to the last, even as his eyes went fast as rats from Charlotte to the Duke to the doors. What an extraordinary surprise. We understood you were in Scotland. Your Grace, forgive us, this is a family matter, deeply painful. The girl has been unwell. I fear whatever she may have told you." "She has told me nothing," said the Duke of Ravenmere. "That the paper will not say better. Please, sit down, Lord Harrow." "I think, Your Grace, that we must beg to be excused." Lord Harrow took his wife's arm, turned toward the doors they had entered by. And the doors closed, softly, from the outside. In the silence that followed, a side door opened instead, and through it came a thin gentleman in spectacles carrying a portfolio, and behind him, a broad, weathered man in a plain brown coat who needed no introduction in that county, because he had been its magistrate for 20 years. "May I present Mr. Everett Crane of Lincoln's Inn," said the Duke, in the tone of a man making dinner conversation. "And Sir John Weller, you know, I believe. Do sit down, Lord Harrow. You have carried those papers a long way. Let us read them." What followed took less than an hour, and Charlotte would remember it all her life as a kind of terrible music, movement by movement, each one closing a door. The deeds came first. Lord Harrow, white to the lips but still fighting, produced them himself. What else could he do? And Mr. Crane laid them out on the dinner table between the roses and the crystal, and walked down the line of them like a general reviewing troops, and in a dry, clear, pitiless voice, took 11 years of paper apart in 20 minutes. Farms sold for half their worth to Lord Harrow's own creditors. A trusteeship that dissolved somewhere in a thicket of conveyances into ownership. A fraud, Sir John, of real craftsmanship, Crane concluded almost with regret, resting entirely on a single foundation, that no rival document survived. No will, no prior claim, no heir. "There is no rival document." Lord Harrow's voice cracked like ice in warm water. "There is no will. There never was. My brother-in-law died intestate. The estate passed through my wife's family line, every court in England." "Josiah," said the Duke quietly. And the last door opened, and Josiah Pennygrove came in. He came in small and gray and trembling, clutching a Japan tin box to his chest. And then he saw Lord Harrow, the man who had broken him, seated at a table with his lies spread out on the cloth. And something happened in the old solicitor's spine, vertebra by vertebra, that was very like a resurrection. "You told the county I stole from my clients," Pennygrove said. His voice shook and got louder as it shook. "You took my name, my lord, because my name was in your way. Well, here is what my name was in the way asterisk of." He set the box on the table and opened it. "The last will and testament of Captain Edward Ashford, copied fair in my own hand from the original I drew for him, witnessed and dated, asterisk everything to his daughter Charlotte, and I will swear to every line of it before God and Sir John, and you may tell them I am a ruined man and a liar, my lord, you may. It worked before. But you wrote one letter too many." "This letter," agreed the Duke of Ravenmere, and drew from his coat a folded page, heavy cream broken black seal, 11 years old. He read it aloud to the dinner table, every word. "It grieves me deeply to inform your Grace that my dear niece Charlotte was taken from us this past winter by a fever in her 13th year. She rests now beside her mother. You declared a living heir dead in your own hand over your own seal to end a search for her." The Duke laid the letter down among the deeds, gently, like the last card of a trick. "Sir John, I'm told handwriting is compared easily enough." "Easily enough," said the magistrate and rose. And Lord Harrow of the smooth voice, of the comfortable laugh, of 11 years of chess, looked down at the table and saw it whole at last. Every paper he had carried through the front door with his own hands, smiling. The will he had thought was ash and buried. The letter he had thought was filed and forgotten. And at the far end of the table, seated, watching him with her father's steadiness, the girl who didn't even know the table was hers. She knew now. He aged 10 years in 10 seconds, and it was Lady Harrow who broke the way her kind always breaks outward at others. It was Henry. She was on her feet, handkerchief forgot, silver gone from her voice forever. Every paper, every signature, his, all his. "I am a wife. What does a wife know of deeds? Sir John, I beg you and Arabella, think of Arabella, an innocent girl, a child, she knew nothing, she." "Mahmoud." Arabella had not spoken all evening. She had sat through the whole terrible music without a sound, staring at Charlotte, at the green silk, at the steadiness. The way one stares at a picture that has been hanging upside down for years and has suddenly been turned right. Now she stood. Her hands went to her throat and worked at the little clasp, and everyone watched, no one breathing, as Arabella walked the length of the dinner table and set down in front of Charlotte, on the white cloth, a small gold locket bordered with pearls. "There's a scratch on the back," Arabella said. Her voice was strange and bare, a voice with the silver stripped off before it could set, shaped like a fish hook. "I looked that night in the carriage. I've looked every day since." She stopped, started again. "I was 7 when you came, Charlotte. I thought for a while, I truly thought we were to be sisters. And then somehow you were at the children's table and I was at the grown-ups, and I never once asked why, because the answer might have moved my chair." She pushed the locket the last inch across the cloth. "It was never mine. I think I always knew. That's the whole of my innocence, and it isn't much. I'm sorry." It was not enough. It was 11 years too late, and it was one small, honest thing in a house built of lies. And Charlotte, closing her hand around her mother's locket at last, found she could not hate her cousin either. There had only ever been room in that family for one architect. "Sir John," said the Duke. The magistrate's men were waiting in the hall. And so it happened, by design, you understand. Nothing that evening happened but by design, that at the precise moment Lord Harrow was escorted out under the great chandelier of Ravenmere, hatless, grey-faced, a man of business on either side of him. The front doors were opening to admit the evening's late guests, invited for 9 o'clock, and the happy announcement, the vicar and his wife, Squire Morton, and Lady Bexley, who came in shaking her umbrella, already talking, and stopped, mid-syllable, with the umbrella still raised, at the sight of the county's most respectable lord being marched past her toward a closed carriage. "Lady Bexley," said the Dowager Duchess of Ravenmere, materializing at her elbow with the timing of 40 years of drawing rooms. "How prompt you are! You've missed dinner, but I promise you the account of it will feed you for a year. Come in, you will want to hear everything." They gathered in the great dining room, the neighbors, the Dowager, old Pennygrove with his box, Mrs. Higgins summoned beaming from the housekeeper's room where she had been waiting all evening, and the Duke of Ravenmere told them the truth, all of it, plainly. The will, the theft, the 11 years. The bracelet, planted by order, sworn to by the weeping housekeeper who had placed it. And Lady Bexley, to her credit, or to the credit of her instincts, which knew a better story when it appeared, turned to Charlotte before the whole room, pressed her hand, and declared that she personally had never believed a word of it, not a word. And no one contradicted her, because that lie, at least, was in a good cause. And by Sunday it would be in 60 houses that the orphan of Harrow Hall was innocent, wronged, and rich, which was true, and that Lady Bexley had known it all along, which was not. And then, when the clock struck 10, the Duke of Ravenmere did the last thing he had planned, and the only thing that evening he was afraid of. He walked to the head of the great table, to the tall chair standing empty there, that had stood empty at Ravenmere for years, because a man who dines alone does not sit at the head of anything, and he drew it back from the table, and turned it toward Charlotte, and stood behind it with his scarred soldier's hands resting on its frame. And the room went quiet on its own. "Miss Ashford, 11 years ago your father asked two things of me. The first, that you should receive what is yours, is done tonight. Harrow Hall is yours. The lands are yours. The name they tried to take is yours, and after this evening no one in England will mistake it again." He paused. "The second thing he asked was that I tell you that your father never forgot you, not for 1 hour. I have said it to you once." I find and hear the Duke of Ravenmere, terror of countesses, veteran of the wars, looked down at his hands on the chair and had to begin again. "I find I would like permission to keep saying it, at breakfast, for the remainder of my life." He looked up. "This chair is empty, Charlotte. It has been empty as long as I've owned it. It is the head of my table, and everything I have comes with it. The house, the name, the man, all of it, and none of it worth the wood it's made of if you say no. Your father wrote that you were to take up room in the world." His voice finally, frankly broke. "Take up mine." Charlotte stood. She crossed the room through a silence you could have leaned on, past Mrs. Higgins with both hands pressed to her mouth, past the dowager sitting very straight with very bright eyes, past Lady Bexley memorizing every blessed second, and she stopped in front of the tall chair and laid her hand on the Duke of Ravenmere's scarred hand and gave him her answer. And whatever the exact words were, the room did not quite hear them because they were half whisper, but everyone heard what came after, and Lady Bexley reported it faithfully in 60 houses, and for once in her life she did not have to improve the story at all. The new mistress of Ravenmere sat down at the head of the table, and then she laughed, a warm, bright, astonishing laugh, a laugh 11 years deep, her mother's laugh set loose at last in a room it had every right to. And the Duke, they said, laughed with her. 5 years is a long time, or no time at all, depending on what you fill it with. Lord Harrow filled it briefly. He did not survive his second winter in prison, his heart, the doctors said, though Mrs. Higgins observed that this was the first evidence anyone had produced of his having one. Lady Harrow filled it in a narrow rented house in Bath, on a small quarterly allowance whose source she never acknowledged and never once refused. She told her new neighbors she was the aunt of the Duchess of Ravenmere, which was true, and that they were very close, which was not. Old Mr. Pennygrove filled it best of all. His office in Milford reopened, his brass plate polished, his name restored, and if you wanted to see a small dusty man stand like a cathedral, you had only to watch him sign himself, as he did on every document, solicitor to the Ashford estate. And at Ravenmere, on a golden October evening 5 years after the night the tables turned, they were laying dinner for 14. It was the harvest dinner, which had grown over the years into something between a family supper and a small, happy riot, the dowager, who at 85 had decided to stop aging out of sheer stubbornness. Mrs. Higgins, retired in name and in name only, Mr. and Mrs. Pennygrove, cousins and neighbors and the vicar, and at the great table with everyone else propped on cushions, banging a spoon with the authority of a chairman calling a meeting to order, the youngest person in the house. Because here is a thing every servant at Ravenmere learned on their first day, and passed to every new footman and kitchen maid since, in the tone of Scripture. There is no children's table in this house. There never would be. The Duchess had given only one standing order about dinners in 5 years, and this was it. The smallest child at Ravenmere sat at the great table at the Duchess's own side, and if the small child dropped the gravy, then the gravy was dropped and the great table survived it. Visitors sometimes found it eccentric. The Duchess let them. As for the old children's table itself, the little one, from the small north room at Harrow Hall, it had gone, freshly painted, to the village school, where it served out its days holding jars of paintbrushes, and never made a single human being feel small again. Charlotte stood at the head of the table, counting places out of old habit. She still did that. She supposed she always would, when her husband came up behind her and looked over her shoulder at the youngest chairman, who was now conducting the candle flames with his spoon. "He has your laugh," said the Duke. "He has my mother's laugh," said Charlotte. "We're only borrowing it, all of us." On the mantel behind them, where other great houses kept marble emperors, stood two small gold lockets, side by side on a velvet stand, one worn smooth from 11 years in a soldier's pocket, one with a hairline scratch shaped like a fish hook. Between them, in a plain frame, a letter in faded brown ink that every person in that house could recite, because the Duchess read it aloud once a year, on her father's birthday, to whoever happened to be at the table. "Take up room, my girl." The first carriages were arriving. The hall filled with cold air and warm noise. The Dowager was already holding court from her chair. Mrs. Higgins was already crying. She cried at every gathering now, prophylactically, to save time, and dinner was 10 minutes from the table when a footman appeared at Charlotte's elbow, hesitating. "Your Grace, there is a person at the door, a lady. She wouldn't give a card and she won't come in. She asked," he glanced at the Duke, uncertain, "she asked only whether the Duchess was at home, and then she said it didn't matter, and then she didn't leave." Charlotte went out through the great doors herself. The evening was blue and gold, the drive full of carriages, and to the side of it all, at the very edge of the lamplight, in a plain gray traveling cloak with 5 hard years written all over it, stood Arabella. She had been a governess in the North, Charlotte knew. The Dowager's intelligence network made Mr. Crane's look amateurish, 2 positions. Then a school, honest and hard and unglamorous, and she had never once written to Bath, and never once asked for anything. And now she stood in the cold at the edge of her cousin's light with her chin up, in the manner of someone who has rehearsed leaving 100 times and arriving not at all. "I was passing," Arabella said, which was absurd, and they both knew it. "Nobody passes Ravenmere," she pressed on anyway. "The school has a holiday. I had it in mind to see. I don't know what I had it in mind to see. The gates, perhaps. And then the gates were open and there were lights, and Her chin lost its position for a moment and got it back. "It's your harvest dinner. I remember hearing of it. I'll go. I only wanted—" She stopped because Charlotte had come down the steps. For a moment the 2 women stood in the blue evening, the Duchess in silk, the governess in gray, the whole crooked history of 2 little girls and one long table standing in the cold between them. And Charlotte thought of a lot of things in that moment. She thought of a locket pushed across white cloth. She thought of asterisk, the answer might have moved my chair. She thought of doors, how many kinds there were, and how everyone in her life had been sorted by which side of one they kept her on. Then she said the only sentence she had ever really needed a lifetime to earn. "There is room at the table for everyone. No one is left at a door in this house. Come in, Arabella. You'll want a wash. The fish is at 8. They said afterward, Mrs. Higgins said, and Lady Bexley retold it in 60 houses with improvements, that it was the finest harvest dinner Ravenmere ever gave. 14 laid, 15 seated, and the 15th chair carried in by the Duke himself, who set it down at the table and said nothing at all, which was, everyone agreed, exactly the right amount. Much later, when the carriages had gone and the candles were burning low, Charlotte carried the small chairman upstairs herself. He was heavy with sleep and pudding, his fist wound into her hair, fighting the dark the way his kind have always fought it, and losing. She sat by his bed in the low light, and gave him the only lullaby she had. "Sleep, my wren, the stars are kind." And from the doorway, where he always somehow was, a voice sang the second line, the way it had been sung once across a library fire, and before that all one long night under canvas to the man who taught it. The dark is deep, but love will find. The child slept. The house settled. And if you had stood that night at the top of the long avenue of Ravenmere and looked back at the last lit window, you would have seen them there a while, the two of them, keeping the small watch that parents keep. Her father had told her he would be watching longer than the road. Charlotte no longer doubted it. Thank you for listening to the story all the way to the end. Please tell us which city you're watching from and what the story made you feel. Don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss new stories.